Okay.
Right, boys, cross up Pembroke, my brav. Stop raining at last. This little video we will call something like, well, getting rid of all those bloody apples really, or perhaps drying and preservation and juicing of fruit, because you can't eat it all at once, can you? Simplest way to preserve an apple is to dry it, and this is the simplest way to dry one. It's an apple here, got one of these corers, they just cost a couple of quid. Poke it out, get your little penknife and skillfully cut it into rings. There we go. I find the best dried apple rings are made with cooking apples. This is true Mochin, and because they are quite sour, especially this time of the year, when you dry them, the starches break down into carbohydrates. So when you dry them, a dried true Mochin, a dried Anglesey pig snout, a dried cooking apple has a more interesting flavour. It's not too sweet. Also, these apple rings will tend to go brown as they oxidise. You can stop that, should you want, by putting I think sodium metabisulfite on, but
I call it lemon juice. They dip them in lemon juice, mate.
Before I was so rudely interrupted, or you could dip them in lemon juice, mate. Should you be bothered? It doesn't matter to me that they're not white. Certain varieties, for example, one that I do called Pigaruiz, Goose's Arse apple, an early cooker, is excellent for drying. It doesn't go brown. I don't know why, but a few varieties don't. So to dry them, you could, for those of you that have got nice radiators and central heating, you could make a little thing of, say, chicken wire and put them in over your radiators, and they dry in a few days. Those of us that don't, and have just got an old wood stove, you could tie a piece of string. This is a piece of string. I'm going to do a Tommy Cooper trick now. This is a piece of string, and you could tie a bunch of apple rings on your piece of string. The trouble is, when you do this, the weight of the rings when they're full of water tends to bend the string down, and as you can see, these two here would tend to stick together, and it's the same with the over radiators. You try to ensure they don't stick together. After a day or so, they dry and become crinkled, and then they push each other apart. But if they're like that, then they stick together and they will go mouldy. Another way to do it, bit of string, no apples. How does Tommy Cooper go, Sarah? Ah.
Just like that.
Just like that. Just like that. They're
just
gone.
Like that.
Just they're gone. Another thing that I do is, this is rebar. Can you see it? It's metal bar with these serrations. Well, if they're banged into a beam above your wood stove, they keep, it doesn't bend, and the serrations keep them apart. So, and after a day or so, again, they twist up, and then they naturally keep themselves apart. So when you're drying fruit, don't let them stick together, because they will never dry, they will just go mouldy. If you're posh like Sarah Coxon here, you can have one of these things.
God, that's really posh. Also sophisticated.
I know, it's got a button. What do? You put the things in here, You put them
It's a
inside.
dehydrator, so you put it overnight. You would put very thin slices of fruit or veg in the trays. There's some lining paper that comes with it as well.
Allow me.
I'll demonstrate it. And you push that sophisticated button at the bottom and leave it on overnight, and they all dry out.
And
Hence
how much
the
does
name
the electric?
dehydrator?
And how much does the electric
Well,
cost?
It's not something that I considered before, but since living with you, I'm being told fairly regularly, really bloody expensive.
Probably is. Anyway, so there's different ways to dry your fruit. Once it's dried, of course, what I do to store it, you can go to the sweet shops and buy those big sweet jars, and you can just ram them in there, and if they're dried properly, I've had them last 3 years. I've found a jar of dried pears recently, and they were perfectly edible. When you go to a sweet shop, if you can, get the plastic sweet jars, because they're much easier to grab when they're... You're pointing up there, sorry, look. They're much easier to grab if they're on a high shelf. Those, that'll do. The glass ones are heavy. If they fall on the floor, they break, and then you've got a mixture of glass and apple rings. You can peel your apples beforehand using one of these potato peelers, should you wish, because some people don't like the dried skin on the rings. I don't like throwing things away, and I'm lazy, so I always leave it on. Another way to core, slice, and should you want peel your fruit is to use one of these little machines. These you just buy online. They're from China. They cost 20 quid or 15 quid, something like that. So when you turn it, you can see it's coring it and slicing it at the same time. That's it done. Off comes the apple in a spiral cut. I could have released this little thing here. There it is, and this thing rubbing on the outside would have taken a thin strip of skin off, but I don't like to waste anything. So we now have, rather than rings, this thing cuts your apples in a spiral, and this is when I really like to use a piece of rebar. I think you could probably use a piece of chain as well to hold the spiral apart for that initial drying evening. Billy, shut up a minute. Because obviously if that was on a piece of floppy string, there's a tendency for that spiral to compress and stick. If that was like that overnight, this thing, they will dry out, and when they dry and twist, they push the spiral apart. So that for me is the quickest way of doing it. Thanks for that one. This is another kind of, this one is just an apple peeler. I think I got it from Lidl's, 10 quid or something, ages ago. I'm not sure that it works anymore, but you can see it has a nice action. There it goes. There it goes. Whoop.
Oh, it's a bit erratic.
Well, no, Mr. Cog, but you can. I don't use it anymore, but you can see there's lots of different. It's lovely, isn't it? The action.
Kind of lovely action, but
Well, that's a
lot of machine for something you could do with a knife.
Yeah, but look at that. Look at that action. Anyway, I think that was £9.99 from Lidl's. Oh, there we go. The previous examples were showing you how to dry fruit to get rid of the 80% of the fruit that is water and keeping the rest to eat, to use and to preserve. What we're doing now is we're using this machine here, and we are now making juice. This thing here is basically a food blender, although all it does is make juice. And it has a revolving disc that revolves really fast with little teeth, and that macerates the whole, everything we put in, it will come out there as juice. We use this thing, these probably cost £3 or £4 or something, to cut the fruit up. See that, Nick?
Yep.
So it's cut the fruit up into handy sections. Also means that we can throw the core away, and we throw the core away because it's full of pips. The pips are full of cyanide, and that makes them bitter. We throw those away. Then we've got all these handy bite-sized morsels which will fit into the thing quickly, and these of course are very good for, you know, when you're for kids' little lunch boxes and stuff. I'll switch it on now. A good thing about these machines is because it macerates the skin rather than throwing it away or not using it, you can get coloured juices. So if you've got a very red apple, for example Machen, which is a big dual purpose apple from South Wales, it will make a nice red juice. Okay, Nick, thanks for that. So now we've made our juice, it's gone into this container, and what we do, we pour it into this, where it's a jam making thing, isn't it, muslin, and that filters it. That keeps, it's mainly not bits, but it's foam. It will filter out this foam and it will drip through, and then we've made our juice. Really nice to drink right away, fresh apple juice. If you want to keep it, it will keep in the fridge for 3 or 4 days. After 3 or 4 days it will start to ferment, but then you've got another couple of days of a slightly tangy, lively on the tongue, bubbly, not cider, but bubbly apple drink, and I like it like that. I don't know if there's a word for it. After that then it will turn to cider, whether you want it or not. To keep this juice for longer, you could sterilize it, which is, you don't have to buy the equipment, which costs a couple of £100. Put it in glass bottles, heat it to, I think it's 70 degrees for 10 minutes or whatever it is. That will come with your instructions, and then pasteurized juice will keep for 2 years in the bottle, in the glass bottle. But what it means is that the juice will always taste a little bit like stewed apple, which is what commercial juices from Tesco's do. What we like to do, because we prefer the taste of fresh apple juice, is go to Tesco's, buy a load of cheap 2-litre bottles of lemonade. They're cheaper for obvious marketing reasons than water. Chuck the lemonade away, then you've got nice clean fresh bottles. Fill them up with the apple juice, but leaving a gap at the top, and then stick them in your deep freeze, and then they last forever. And of course, being plastic, they will expand slightly, and with a gap at the top, it will take that expansion, and then it will last indefinitely, really. The other thing with this sort of machine, you get the spent pomace, which is this, which is your apple, really, isn't it? Less the juice. When the boys were little, we used to call this muck, and with this muck we used to mix it up with sugar and cinnamon, and then flatten it out on baking trays and dry it over the stove, and then we'd have thin layers of fruit leather. We'd cut it up and then they would wrap it up in cling film, and then you've got nice little bars of fruit leather. And at one time they actually sold them to the health food shops, and they made their pocket money doing it. That's it, Nick. Thanks. Barrow boy.
I do, Joyce.
So this we're now still on juicing, but we're taking it a stage bigger rather than use a kitchen size blender type thing. We're now using this. If you step back, Nick, get an idea of it. This is a press, a traditional looking press. It's made in America. It's Happy Valley Ranch. See that there? The logo or the branding, yeah, like a brand on a horse, isn't it? You'd stick that on your horse's bum, that burn it in, Happy Valley Ranch. So here we are. So this came from America. So it's for backyard orchardists or cowboys from America. So we turn, basically they're all the same. Turn the handle, the scratter, see those teeth? The scratter will chop the apples up. They will fall down the chute into this basket. The basket has a liner to stop the bits falling out, and then once the basket is full, we will put this piston, this wooden piston, there you go, Nick, yeah, got it, on there, and that will squash it down, and we will turn the screw, and then the juice will come out into the pan. There we go.
Okay.
Thanks. Right, yeah, Nick?
Okay, I do.
So, we'll just, Nick will show you the thing in action, as it were. There we go, Rick. Got it?
Yeah.
Down the hole. And round the side, if you can, Nick, just see it comes out. And you can see the chopped up pomace dropping into the basket. We will now flatten that out a bit. Put on the piston. So we put the piston in now, and we're now winding it down. And you can see, Nick can show you down there of the juice coming out. I'll just grab a glass, Nick. There we go. Look at that. Lovely fresh apple juice. Yakida.
Yakida.
Here we are with our nice fresh apple juice. Juice, like apples, when you bite them, they tend to oxidize, they go brown. So to stop that, we need to bottle this as soon as possible. Or you can put vitamin C in there. That stops.
Antioxidant.
It's an antioxidant. Well done, Nick. Thank you. It's an antioxidant, stops it oxidizing and keeps its natural colour. The final thing is, believe it or not, I'm quite old-fashioned. There are more modern ways of, a bit closer, Nick, probably for the volume. There are more modern ways of juicing these days. You can buy basically glorified garden shredders, about 300 quid, and they will turn your apples into a slime, into like a porridge, which obviously the smaller the pieces of apples, the more juice you can get out. So the modern people use these garden shredder type arrangements. And also, I've been told, I've never even seen one, but the modern way to extract the juice now, there's a machine that has like the inside of a washing machine drum, stainless steel with holes in, and it has a bladder, and that bladder fills up with water, just tap pressure, and that expands and that forces the juice out. They're popular now, but I've never used one because I'm stuck with the Happy Valley Ranch. Thank you very much, Nick.